Hey guys, alright? Welcome everyone. The story begins with the fall of a meteorite in New Mexico in the 50s. More than 6 decades later, we see that a military laboratory has been built in the same place. 3 soldiers are being chased by something, and one of them tries to close the metal door to contain the threat but ends up failing to enter the passcode. A shadow at the end of the hallway frightens him, and he starts shooting. Farther ahead, the other 2 can only hear his screams. The thing catches up to them soon after and attacks another. The last one continues to flee, and as he tries to illuminate the path, we catch a glimpse of a creature. When he kicks the last door open, a giant ant-like creature is already waiting to attack him. Days later, friends Jorge and Miguel cross the desert to reach a cave where they hope to find silver. Jorge claims he discovered this place earlier while throwing a party for a stupid gringo. A fallen sign warns that this is a laboratory of the Chicane Company. Miguel is visibly frightened and repeatedly asks if this is really a good idea. He becomes even more apprehensive when he sees revolver bullets and asks what the target could have been. Jorge continues to laugh at his concern, saying that people get scared for no reason. Soon after, we see a shadow of something huge looming over him. Jorge is attacked, and Miguel runs away with a monstrous insect on his tail. Just steps away from reaching the car, the monster jumps on him. The next day, a young mechanic named Brian is glued to the TV, watching his favorite character, the Eradicator. Arriving on a powerful motorcycle, the hero strikes a dramatic pose before gunning down a zombie. Brian cheers at the action scenes and sighs when he sees the grateful woman at the end. When his brother Lucas arrives, we find out that today is a very special day for both of them. There will be a big party in the desert to celebrate Lucas's victory in the motorcycle race. And the one handing out the prize is none other than the idol of both brothers, the actor who plays the Eradicator in the film series. Lucas brags about winning the race but admits that it wouldn't have been possible without his brother as the mechanic. Therefore, he promises to call him to the stage when he receives the trophy. It soon becomes apparent that the 2 brothers don't have much in common besides their passion for motorcycles and action movies. Brian is shy and very responsible, while Lucas just wants to enjoy life. Loading the motorcycle in the back of the pickup, the 2 excitedly leave home for the party, unaware of the posters with pictures of missing persons. When Brian starts to feel uneasy about the road, Lucas reveals that he also invited their friend Lisa. Realizing his brother's plan, Brian gets very nervous, but Lucas says he needs to gather the courage to invite her out. Brian is stunned by the sight of the girl when they arrive at her house. He tries to make conversation but ends up talking about grades and report cards, to his brother's despair. Then the 3 set off toward the desert party. Lisa reveals herself to be a big fan of the Eradicator, which makes Brian even more in love. In the rearview mirror, Lucas sees 2 motorcycles approaching and starts grumbling when he recognizes the Guarisco brothers, his racing rivals. Without a second thought, he hands the wheel to Brian while putting on his helmet and jumps on his motorcycle, ready to show who the champion is. Lisa is shocked to see the motorcycle leap from the pickup and tells Brian that his brother is crazy. Lucas maintains the lead for the rest of the way and performs several impressive stunts. His arrival causes a stir at the party, further irritating the Guarisco brothers. Ignoring the jealous ones, Lucas pulls his brother into the party and encourages him to go talk to Lisa. Brian responds that it's very difficult to compete for the girl's attention when his own brother is so fearless. Without disagreeing with the compliments, Lucas tells his brother to stop feeling inferior because what girls like is confident guys. The speech motivates Brian, and he decides to take action, but Craig Guarisco ends up being quicker. Brian is so upset by this that he walks away very early and doesn't realize that Craig is a complete failure when it comes to flirting. Lisa responds to everything he says with impatience, but he doesn't catch on. Then her brother, Tim, arrives, asking Lisa if Craig is bothering her, and she immediately says yes. The 2 start arguing, and the girl ends up being left aside. Brian is already far from the party when the big moment arrives. Lucas is called to the stage and keeps his promise to call him, but he doesn't show up. Enjoying the blues at the edge of the cliff, Brian gets startled by the sudden arrival of his brother. Then Lucas throws a can away, and Brian complains about his inconsiderate behavior, but the other ignores him and opens another. When Brian asks for a beer too, he says it was the last one. As he throws the second can, Lucas spots the cave entrance and becomes curious. He decides to go to the location to explore, ignoring Brian's protests, who thinks it's a terrible idea. Arriving at the laboratory, Brian begins listing all the bad things that could happen if they enter, from possible arrest to deadly traps. He soon realizes he is talking to himself, as his brother has already gone inside. When he decides to follow him, we see that they are traversing the same tunnels the soldiers used during the evacuation. Lucas pops open another beer, and Brian gets mad because he lied about not having any left. Trying to explain himself, Lucas says he was just trying to convince him to return to the party. Meanwhile, Lisa is alone in the desert when Craig scares her. Showing that there's no one else around, he tells her she can stop playing hard to get and admit that she likes him. Tired of treating him politely, Lisa responds to his advances with a kick. Arriving at the cafeteria, Lucas is happy at the prospect of finding more beer, but unfortunately, the fridge is empty. Brian thinks it's very strange that it's still working. In the next hallway, he briefly loses sight of his brother and starts calling for him. Lucas suddenly pops out of a window and says he found something amazing. Through the passage marked Group 9, the two enter a room full of slimy webs. Right in the center, there is a pile of strange volumes enveloped in the same slime. Suddenly, a terrible screech breaks the silence. Lucas's first reaction is to go after the sound to investigate, while Brian is even more inclined to turn back. In the hallway, they notice a shadow moving away, and Lucas insists on following it until he sees bloodstains on the tiles. He suddenly agrees with his brother, deciding it's better to get out of there as soon as possible. Returning the way they came, they pass the cafeteria again, but now it is no longer empty. They take a few seconds to process the horror of what they are seeing. The creature is a mix of spider and ant and is larger than the sofa. With a scream of terror, they both rush back into the hallway and shut the door. Disgusted with the thing, Lucas says he hates ants and starts crawling away. The brothers whisper to each other, having seen the creature come to the door when they screamed. But then Lucas's phone begins to ring loudly. It's Lisa calling, still searching for them in the desert. Lucas tries to explain what happened without speaking too loudly, but this only confuses her. The phone's battery dies before he finishes explaining the way to the laboratory. Trying to find something to defend themselves with, they knock a tray over, and with a bang, the ant quickly arrives, beginning to search the area while they hide behind the counter. Complaining about the stress of the situation, Lucas pulls out another beer he was hiding and opens the can before Brian can stop him. The ant hears the noise and heads straight for them. Running into the cafeteria, they both slip on the floor, and the ant passes right above them. As it begins to approach Lucas, Brian distracts it and tries to repeat the trick. The ant passes over again, and he hits the button to close the door, but its leg gets caught. Lucas tries to help him in the most stupid way possible, throwing very light objects. He also makes a point of finishing the beer before tossing the can. Seeing that none of this is working, he throws himself to the ground and grabs his brother, which doesn't help at all either. Now they are both being pulled through the door, and this would surely be the end if it weren't for Lisa. She arrives with a sledgehammer and hits the ant until she kills it. Very confused, she asks what just happened and is relieved to hear that the boys also saw a giant insect. But then she suddenly stops, saying that ants emit a pheromone when wounded, alerting the entire colony for an immediate attack. Lucas asks how she knows all this, and Brian starts lecturing him, saying that Lisa can be both beautiful and smart at the same time. She interrupts him to show that she didn't know anything and was just reading from the poster on the wall. The trio soon discovers that the information is correct as they see several ants screeching at the door. They run away and enter the first empty room, where they find a series of computers. Lucas starts pressing buttons, and a video begins. It's an educational animation teaching children how to protect themselves from killer ants in case of an infestation. When the video ends, the screen shows a room similar to Group 9, and Lucas starts shooting the ants through the controls, thinking it's a video game. Brian tells him it's real, but when he tries to press more buttons, another video starts. The scientist on the screen introduces himself as Dr. Renard and explains that there was a problem with the experiment. Since they obtained alien DNA from the meteorite fall, scientists tested various combinations with different insects until arriving at the current form of the creatures. However, Group 9 developed strategic capabilities, setting an ambush for the staff during feeding time. The entire military apparatus of the laboratory was insufficient to contain them, and several people have disappeared since then. Renard warns that the ants will look for a cool, dark place for the queen to lay her eggs. Fortunately, they need ethanol to reproduce, and that won't be too easy to find in the middle of the desert. Lisa is the only one who understands the gravity of the message and explains to her friends that the desert is full of ethanol at that very moment because the party they were at was supplied with many liters of alcoholic drinks. Unaware of any of this, the young people are still having fun and dancing until a guy notices that a gallon of drink is being stolen. Curious, he decides to get closer to take a look and can hardly believe it when he sees the monster drinking. The guy screams and turns to flee, but his head is struck by the empty gallon. Then the dance is interrupted by another ant, spreading terror throughout the party. A woman is hit directly by the acidic slime, and everyone is shocked by her corroded face. People try to run to their cars, but the ants are faster, and there are dozens of them descending into the valley, and soon the attack begins. Not even the speedy Guarisco brothers can escape, as the ants chase them down the road and attack Tim. When Brian, Lucas, and Lisa return to the party location, there is no one left. Deciding to alert the authorities, the three get in the car, but the vehicle is attacked by one of the ants, and they are forced to flee on a motorcycle. Arriving at a fork in the road, the brothers split up, and Brian heads toward a cliff. He tells Lisa to hold on, planning an incredible leap to the other side, but she does the exact opposite and knocks the motorcycle over, preventing the insanity. Shocked by her action, he asks if she would have acted differently if the rider were Lucas. Then Lisa loses her patience and confesses that she likes Brian and always preferred him precisely because he doesn't usually do that kind of nonsense. Brian is on cloud 9 upon hearing this but takes too long to regain his composure. When he looks back, he sees Lisa being dragged by an ant. Lucas arrives soon after and says they need to seek help, but Brian refuses to leave Lisa behind. He knows a place nearby with several dark and cold caves. According to what Renard said, the ants must be heading there. Reluctantly, Lucas agrees to go with him. It doesn't take long before they pass the entrance to one of the tunnels, and Brian asks his brother to stop. Lucas isn't very confident but follows his brother into the tunnel. After a long walk, they arrive at the ant's nest and find several people hanging in the slimy web. In the center, the web also covers several eggs that emit a greenish glow. Then Brian realizes that the ants are keeping these victims to feed their offspring. Upon seeing Lisa, he rushes to free her from the wall, but the rescue is interrupted by a high-pitched screech. The brothers are even more surprised by the sound of gunfire that follows. After taking out the ant, Dr. Renard steps from the shadows, saying they need to get out of there before the others arrive. Lisa is still unconscious, and Renard says it's impossible to remove her without special tools. Brian promises Lisa he will return to get her and then follows the scientist along with Lucas. Exiting the cave, Renard says automatic weapons have been set up in the desert to contain the creatures in a case like this. He gives Brian a map to avoid those areas because the robotic weapons can't differentiate between monsters and humans. Still confused, Brian asks how he plans to command battles if he obviously can't control the ants. A bit offended, Renard explains that his project was never military, and no one intended to use the ants as weapons. The goal was to produce the web, as the material is so strong that it could be used in bulletproof vests. He tells the boys there is another laboratory in Bradley, where they will find special weapons to stop the ants. According to him, the eggs will begin to hatch in 30 minutes. He also expresses hope that Group 10 will be perfect, and then Lucas starts yelling at him, shocked that he still wants to continue the experiment. Renard begins justifying the need for individual sacrifices in the name of scientific advancement. Just then, the queen ant appears, a creature larger than any they have seen so far, and she grants Renard the honor of sacrificing himself for science. In the nest, Lisa is already waking up, and one of the ants approaches her, seemingly inspecting its prey. 10 minutes later, the brothers arrive in Bradley and immediately find a fallen employee. Brian starts opening all the doors, frantically searching for the special weapons. The only thing they find, incredibly, is cans of beer. The two retrace their steps, but now there is an ant eating the remains of the employee. Reaching his limit, Lucas says they need to call someone and stop playing heroes. Brian wants to try to pass by the ant and begins to motivate his brother with lines from the Eradicator. Lucas eventually agrees, on the condition that he has a beer first. Brian says he wants one too, remembering that he hasn't had any so far. However, when Lucas goes to grab the second can, it won't budge. The light underneath it activates a sensor and makes a door open, revealing the room they were looking for. Besides 2 weapons and a web cutter, the brothers are astonished to see 2 uniforms ready for combat. They return to the hallway fully equipped and take out the ant in a few seconds. The weapons are so modern that they even alert when the shooter accidentally points at an ally. Now there are only 10 minutes left until the brood hatches. To complete the lucky phase, Brian finds 2 ready motorcycles to get them back in time. Brian frees Lisa from the web, and she is almost as grateful as the girl in the movie, but then realizes the boys are going in the wrong direction. Asking her to trust him, Brian says there's no point in running away now because it will be much worse later. Advancing deeper into the cave, he encounters the queen and begins to shoot. Only then does he realize that he relied too much on the technology. The weapon stops responding to his commands, claiming lack of ammunition when there are still bullets. The queen remains unscathed and appears furious, sending an army of ants after her attacker. Changing plans immediately, Brian tells Lisa to run for the exit. The couple gets on the motorcycle and speeds away, but then Brian suddenly stops and checks Renard's map. Lisa panics when she sees a horde of creatures running toward them. Brian says he had an idea and revs up again, entering the forbidden area. The motorcycle's speed outpaces the automatic weapons, which end up only hitting the ants. When the couple stops and celebrates their successful plan, they hear a fierce screech above them and remember that the Queen is still there. Meanwhile, Lucas is freeing his drunk friends from the web. Seeing one of them with a vodka tank on his back, Lucas says he will need that. After spreading the drink throughout the nest, he is about to light a fire when he hears a moan and realizes that his rival Tim Guarisco is still stuck in the web. Meanwhile, the Queen backs the couple into a corner, and Lisa tells Brian he has to jump. He is scared to take the risk, but she encourages him with a kiss. The motorcycle comes dangerously close to the Queen to gain momentum and then flies over the cliff in a cinematic leap. The two crash to the ground, leaving the Queen behind. But when they get into the car, Brian can't start the engine, and the vehicle begins moving backward. Then Lisa realizes they are caught in the Queen's web, pulling the car toward the cliff. Brian pleads for the weapon to start firing again, but there's no positive response. Lisa decides to try another approach and starts cursing the gun until it works. Then she finally defeats the Queen, who falls off the cliff, taking the car with her. The two jump out moments before the fall. In the nest, Lucas agrees to save Tim only when he promises to acknowledge his superiority as a writer. Then he lights the lighter again, but the first hatchling already comes running and jumps right on his head. Managing to get rid of it, Lucas crushes it with his foot, and his lighter falls, igniting the web. When Brian reaches the entrance, Tim says his brother stayed inside to exterminate the nest and save everyone. Then Craig also arrives, very relieved to see his brother alive. Upon hearing that it was Lucas who saved him, he puts on his helmet and rides his motorcycle into the cave. A few seconds later, he emerges with Lucas on the back, escaping the explosion by a hair's breadth. Everyone returns to the party location, where Brian finally gets a beer. Only then does the famous Eradicator arrive, much to the delight of the young people. He says he's thirsty, and Brian offers him his can. As soon as he cracks it open, the beer is snagged by the web of a giant ant. Brian, Lucas, and Lisa point their weapons in a synchronized pose as the Eradicator starts whimpering and shrinks back behind them.